name is Connor. In this review, I'm going to be comparing the Nikon 14mm fixed f-stop 2.8 lens with the Nikon 14 to 24mm f-stop 2.8 lens. Now what I'm going to be doing in this review is I'm going to be talking about first look of the lens, the look and the feel, the build quality, and the control performance and stuff like that. Then we're going to be comparing the image quality with screen flow between these two lenses. And after that, I'm going to give my final opinions on the field testing and what these lenses should be used for and stuff like that. First thing I want to start off with is the look and feel of the lens. Starting with the fixed 14mm lens, this lens is very nice looking. Probably one of my favorite lenses because simply of how cool it looks. What's awesome about this lens is really how compact it is. It's very short. It's a little bit fat, but it's very short, easy to put into a bag and easy to carry around. Not that heavy at all, especially now when compared to the 14 to 24mm, which is absolutely huge compared to the fixed 14mm lens. Just the front element alone is like a lot wider than the fixed 14mm lens. Another great thing about the 14mm lens as well is the fact that it can take filters. You can actually attach filters to the back of this lens, whereas with the 14 to 24mm, you can't attach filters to it at all. You have to get like a special filter holder system, which costs quite a bit of money. Now, some of the advantages of the 14 to 24mm is the fact that it does have a zoom range. Not only can you use 14mm, you can also go all the way up to 24mm. That makes it a little more appealing for the landscape photographer who likes to use ultra wide angles, but also likes to have a little bit of a zoom range as well to get more of a standard wide angle. Another thing that the 14 to 24mm lens has an advantage is that since it's newer, it does have some newer features on it that the older 14mm fixed lens does not have. For example, manual override. You can have it in autofocus, yet you can manually override with the lens, whereas with the 14mm fixed lens, you have to push this little button here and switch it from auto to manual mode in order to manually focus, which is kind of a pain, but it's really not that big of a deal. Also, the 14mm lens has the old aperture ring here that you have to turn. And in order to use this on newer digital SLRs, you have to turn it to 22, f-stop 22, and pull down this little orange switch in order to get it to work on your digital SLRs. In the end, the major difference between these two lenses is simply the sheer size and weight. The 14mm fixed lens is so much smaller and so much lighter. Even if it is fixed, it just might be worth getting over the 14 to 24mm simply to have a more compact lens. However, even though the 14mm is quite a bit larger and heavier, the sharpness and performance of the lens in terms of image quality is quite a bit better. And that's actually what we're going to take a look at now. We're going to go over to screen flow and compare images taken with these two lenses. Alright, now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the sharpness comparison between the Nikon 14mm fixed lens and the Nikon 14 to 24mm lens. Now here we are, the 14mm fixed lens. What we're going to do is we're going to compare center sharpness between these two lenses. Here's the center sharpness at f-stop 2.8 14mm fixed lens, and here it is with the 14 to 24mm lens. Now already you can see a massive difference between the sharpness in these lenses. This is much softer in the center than the 14 to 24mm is in the center. The difference is definitely noticeable. When we stop down, here we have f-stop 4 on the fixed 14mm lens, and even then you still see a difference in sharpness. It's still not quite as sharp as the 14 to 24mm at f-stop 2.8. And then of course f-stop 4 is much sharper on the 14 to 24mm. It's not till about 5.6 that you start to see that the 14 fixed lens comes close to being as sharp as the 14 to 24mm lens in the center. And here's the 14 to 24mm at f-stop 8 and the 14 fixed at f-stop 8. And as you can see, the sharpness is about the same there. But anytime before that, the 14mm fixed lens is definitely way softer, even in the center. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the corners, the more further corners of the image. Now, I'm going to take a look here in this corner. Now the 14mm fixed lens actually does a decent job in terms of sharpness. You know, it's not perfect, but it's better than some older wide-angle lenses. Here's the 14mm fixed lens at f-stop 2.8. And here's the 14 to 24 at f-stop 2.8. As you can see, the sharpness is not as different as you would think. It's pretty close to being the same. The difference, however, is in terms of vignetting. You can see that the 14mm fixed lens has tons of vignetting. It's extreme, so extreme, and probably not really all that fixable, even in Photoshop, whereas the 14 to 24mm does not have nearly as much vignetting. And in my opinion, I would prefer less vignetting than as much vignetting as the fixed 14 gives you. I just don't think that's very fixable, and it would take a while to fix probably in Photoshop. As you can see, sharpness is not that different. In fact, 14 to 24mm might be slightly softer. There we are again, and here the 14mm fix is actually softer here than the 14 to 24mm. So all in all, I can say the sharpness is pretty close to the same. Now we're going to stop down to f-stop 4. And this is when the 14 to 24mm really excels. You can see here the 14mm fixed lens at f-stop 4, and at its 14 to 24mm f-stop 4 is quite a bit sharper. And from then on, the 14 to 24mm is a lot sharper than the 14 to fixed millimeter lens throughout the entire range. So sharpness with the 14 to 24mm is quite a bit better than the fixed 14mm lens. Maybe not quite as better as I thought it would be originally, but especially in the center, there's definitely a difference, and in the corners too, you can see that difference. And of course, the 14 to 24mm has the zoom range, which makes it more useful for stuff like landscape photography. And of course, the vignetting is just absolutely horrible on the 14mm fixed lens. And that is a little bit on the image quality comparison between these two lenses. Now I'm going to talk about how these lenses perform in the field. I'm going to give my opinions as to what to use these lenses for and which one's better than the other. Now, like I said earlier, the 14mm fixed lens is a lot smaller, more compact, and I would recommend it for some things, except for the fact that it's not nearly as sharp as the 14 to 24mm lens. The 14 to 24mm lens is just so much sharper than the fixed 14mm lens. Even wide open, this thing is tack sharp. And the vignetting on the 14mm, even wide open, is pretty bad and is very noticeable, and it's very soft in the corners too. Whereas with the 14 to 24mm, you get tack sharp images, and you get a lot less vignetting than you would with the standard 14mm lens. So that is really the deal breaker with this. So because of the image quality of this lens, I actually wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend just saving up and getting the 14 to 24mm lens. I really highly recommend getting this lens over these older fixed lens, simply because of how much better the image quality is. This has been a comparison between the Nikon 14mm fixed lens and Nikon 14 to 24mm.